Welcome to Education Table Talk. This is Michael J., your host, and really welcome you back after a really successful show last month, and really appreciated everybody listening. Today we have, as usual, three very, very exciting guests. We'll get a chance to introduce them in a little bit. You can hear our new music in the background that actually is working correctly at this show as opposed to the last one. Our topic today is looking at personalized learning. In fact, it's the title officially is Putting the Person in Personalized. I think so often we think about sort of the institution of a process and we forget really the goal. And that really is the goal of today's show, is to really get at the very nature of personalized. I do want to mention right up front our charter sponsor, and that is MCH Strategic Data. They're really a wonderful group to work with. Do recommend them highly for all the myriad of services that they offer. And I think people forget they don't just offer services in education, but have a much broader offering, and I think that gives them really, really nice experience around serving your needs in K-12, in the K-12 marketplace. So recommend them highly. Again, as I said, our topic today is really looking at personalized learning, and it's an item that's really near and dear to my heart. For those of you out there who are listening who know me, I tend to sort of push the limits on some things occasionally, and that was true as well, particularly when I was in high school. I was pretty much a science nerd, and really took very, very different approach to my educational process. Was involved with science fairs and took a lot of independent studies classes, and was part of what they called then the gifted program. Who knows why, but in fact I was, and it really allowed me to really define my education a lot better, and I think that had a huge impact on the nature of who I am and how I think about the world around me. And I think that personalized ultimately is a responsibility of the learner, but so often we put barriers in the way, and we teach kids, and you've heard me on this show mention this before, we teach kids how to play school, and so they are successful at what we traditionally think of school. And I think the discussion that we're going to have today is really about how do you break out of that model, and how do we provide ways for kids to be able to express themselves, pursue their interests, and really have a fundamentally personalized environment, and what role does technology play in supporting that, et cetera, et cetera. I know our guests will get to that. Speaking of our guests, today, again, as I said, we have three very talented people, all of whom I know quite well, which is really nice. So let me just say about each one of them. Barbara Bray, I've known for many, many, many years through multiple incarnations, and Barbara is a spirited person, to say the least. Barbara, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, well, that's great that you said I'm spirited. Michael, I've known you for, I think it's been maybe 20 years, and
yeah.
I had a similar situation as you in school. I was a good student, but not a real good learner, and that's why I really wanted to figure out a way to put the person back in personalized, and so this is really near and dear to my heart. In fact, maybe I should just tell you, I'm co-founder of Personalized Learning with Kathleen McClaskey, and that came out of several people saying, put your heads together, you might change the world. I don't know about that, but I've been writing and speaking all about making learning personal for years. So I really thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to be on this panel with you.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, Barbara. Another speaker we have today, second speaker, Steve Nordmark. Steve and I actually co-chair the Tech and Dev group of the SIIA, and I've known Steve for many, many years. Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Michael. As you heard from Michael, we co-chair the Tech and Dev Committee for SIA, and that's where I get my geek outlet as well. I serve as the Chief Academic Officer for Novation, and at Novation we really focus on reducing the barriers to learning. We partner with educators, districts, education technology developers, content providers, always looking to implement innovative personalized learning solutions. I've been in the ed tech space for about 20 years. My role as the Chief Academic Officer caused me to focus on the vision of ed tech to support personalized learning. I focus a lot on the research, analysis, and collaboration around the trends in learning science, interoperability, and technology architecture foundations. My technical background supports me a lot in thinking about the enablement and equalizer opportunities for technology, but my passion is really in serving all kids, especially those in the margins. So thanks for the opportunity to be on.
Perfect. Yeah, and Steve's not just spouting words. He actually does what he says. So great stuff, Steve. And last is Sean Bay, and Sean and I have gone through about as close as you can be to war without being in the military, and that is that we were served on the SIF, the Schools Interoperability Framework Board, together. And I'll tell you, when you're on a board at the beginning of an organization, you're not telling somebody else what to do. You're doing it yourself. And so you get to know somebody pretty well when you're in the trenches with them. So, Sean, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, and I'm glad you and I both survived that, time in the trenches. I'm the founder of eScholar, and what we've been doing, and this is how Michael and I got to know one another, we've been managing the data now, I guess, for about 25 or so million pre-K through 20 students, and I've been doing this for about 17 years now, and the reason we really have gotten very involved in personalized education, that's really the term I would tend to use here, and I could even describe why, is where we see the value in all that data, because we're collecting, very detailed level data on behalf of states and school districts and institutions here. And a lot of the data is used for accountability, but where we see the value, where it really impacts learning, is where you can leverage those data to help individual students achieve their goals. And so that's really what we've been focused on for the past 5 or 6 years, is taking those data that would otherwise be just used for accountability and using them to help individual students learn. So thanks, Michael, for having me on.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And that's always the biggest concern, is the data just gets sucked in someplace and doesn't actually have an impact on the learning itself. So that's great that your organization's evolving that way. So, well, before we dig into this topic quite deeply, and we will have plenty of time to do that, we're going to go to a segment that everybody tells us they love, and that is You Can't Handle the Truth. In You Can't Handle Your Truth, many of you who've listened to the show before may know, but I'll explain to those who haven't, we actually provide each of our guests with a rumor based on, in this case, personalized learning. And you, the listeners, as well as our guests, have to guess which of the 3 rumors is actually a truth, which is really the case. And it's a challenging way to think about it, but it's a great way to think about the topic. So we're going to go ahead and jump in with our guests reading those three rumors. The first one is going to be read by Sean Bay, and this one is called How Am I Doing? So, Sean, go for it.
All right. Personalized learning typically has the learner take greater responsibility for their education. However, many educators are reticent about taking the next step, which is letting the student themselves do their own assessment. One British Columbia educational leader, who's both a teacher and an administrator, did just that. Once her class of 6th graders reached the end of the term, the students completed their own self-assessment. After putting considerable effort into the evaluation, one student wrote, "I don't like grading myself. I feel more comfortable being graded by someone else, like you, Mrs. Henriksen. You would be better at grading me because you have more experience with grading." Mrs. Henriksen answered the student by saying, "No one really knows you better than you know yourself." And she added, and another student got so upset about completing the self-assessment that he refused to conference with me about my learning in this term, or about his learning in this term. I'm not good at reading these things. And the student wrote, I think I deserve an F. Reflecting on this experience, Mrs. Hendrickson writes, I find it disturbing that grades are done to our students and not with our students. And it's sad that most students feel so uncomfortable about reflecting on their own learning and sharing this information with others. As for the student who was so hard on themselves, Ms. Hendrickson writes, I let him know that he did not, in fact, deserve an F. He'd done a lot of learning during this term. Unfortunately, that didn't seem to make a difference in his thoughts.
Thank you for that, Sean. And you're a great reader. I know you were just emotionally choked up by this. So thank you for sharing that rumor with us. That's How Am I Doing? The next one will be read by Barbara Bray, and this one is called Don't Take This Personally. Go ahead, Barbara.
Okay, let's see if I can do this. All right. So when Stirnham School District decided that personalized learning was the best strategy to retain students in grades 6 through 8, they were unprepared for the changes in classroom instruction. They modeled their efforts after some of the work that had been done in Rhode Island on student-driven instructional goals, where both the child and the advisor had to agree on how the student would be measured. And here's where the system fell apart. Some students found it hard to deviate from what they knew as standard curriculum, whereas others fully embraced this newfound freedom. Some students built their education program on activities they enjoyed most by showing how they would meet standards requirements through items they developed. While educators closest to this initiative were excited by these proposals, those at individual schools were taken aback. One administrator commented, "It's like we're handing the keys to the inmates. We're not preparing these kids for their futures by letting them decide their own curriculum." The district is in the process of making modifications to their program to provide a more limited set of tracks. One student said, "I knew it was too good to be true. I thought I could do something I like and do school at the same time."
Thank you for that, Barbara. And it sounds like we both can relate to that particular story. That was Don't Take This Personally. And again, thank you, Barbara. So last but certainly not least, let's go to Steve Nordmark, who will be reading Me, Myself, and Other to us.
All right. So Me, Myself, and Other. As part of a school board outreach, a school district in New Hampshire found parents like the idea of their children being introspective and taking ownership of their learning. But the parents couldn't find a way to balance this issue of student privacy. After much deliberation, the board decided that students could benefit from the process of personalization and introspection by playing the role of someone else. Students selected to assume the persona of sports figures, historical figures, musicians, even magicians, as they engaged in their daily lessons. Mr. Stockton, Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, said, "People have a long history of modeling their lives after that of those they admire. So we thought, why not apply that to the process of personalization? Learning how others learn and make decisions is a tried and true pedagogical process." One parent, who is also a professor at a local university, shared, "Building a clearly formed personal philosophy of human life and the universe is key to child development. And what better way to develop that than understanding the implications of decisions made by others?" While some claim that this is a rather odd way of using the term personalized, one child stated, "It's a lot of fun being someone else in class, but my parents still think that the grades on my report card are all mine."
Well, thanks for reading that, Steve. That was Me, Myself, and Other. So we're going to come back to those three. Think about those three different rumors, and you can let us know what you think by tweeting us at hashtag ETTMAR, ETTMAR, and you can also tweet to at EdTableTalk. So at EdTableTalk. So let us know what you think. Our guests are going to discuss these at the end of the show. and we'll sort of hear some of their comments and around that. So thank you to all three of you for reading that. Let's go ahead and jump into the core topic, and that is really looking at this issue about putting the person in personalized. Who wants to jump in? Any particular thoughts?
Well, I'm going to jump in. One of the things is I didn't really go into my passion and why I want to do this. And what I find is, in fact, Steve said something and I really like what he said. It was reducing and minimizing the barriers and maximizing the learning. And one of the things that we found is that universal design for learning is something that has been created for special needs, but it really is for all learners. It's that idea of finding the strengths and challenges and then using those to help the learner define who they are and how they learn best, and then help them on their journey. And, I just want to open the door there because it seems like in some of it's about ownership and giving the learning back to them. And I think Sean mentioned accountability. The problem is right now is teachers are so accountable. If we can have the learners accountable for their learning and the teachers are guiding the process, then there's that feeling and they get the passion to learn and the purpose to learn.
Barbara, this is Steve. I'm glad that you brought up the UDL. I think Universal Design for Learning, UDL, is key, and I view it as a major foundation for being able to personalize learning. So I'm glad that you brought that up because even though it does a lot of times kind of focus in on what people view as that special ed thing, it's not. It really is a foundation for all learners. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And I'm also glad that you brought up the accountability thing because when Sean was doing his introduction, that's the one thing I wrote down, the context that you mentioned, Sean, of accountability versus individual goals. And, that locus of accountability today in public education is so far away from the learner in the majority of the cases that it's really unfortunate. So glad to hear that, you're working on opportunities to use that data that typically is pulled away from the locus of the learner and bring it back to them.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're seeing here is when you get down to the individual student, and I think we're all in agreement that when we're talking about personalized, I would say personalized education. I will talk about why I would say that, but it is all students. And there are certainly a lot of places where people go, oh, absolutely, we should have individualized learning plans for special education for this population of students and that population of students. Well, the fact is, we should have an individual plan, a personalized plan for every individual student. And when you think about the accountability at the student level, the students are accountable to their goals. That's what if you think about, you talk to students and say, okay, why do you feel either engaged or disengaged? It's all about things being relevant to what they want to do, what they want to do this year in school, what they want to do with their lives when they grow up, what they want to do today. That's where the accountability has to be. So Steve and Barbara, I absolutely agree with you, particularly what you're saying there, Steve. When you look at accountability measures that are at some very high level, okay, in total are all the students of this type reading at grade level, you're right, it's so far disconnected from the student. But if we get down to the level of individual students and their goals, that moves them forward, and we change those numbers at the top. But now it becomes very, very real with individual students.
One of the problems, Sean, and what we're finding is that students want this. We call them learners. We don't call them students anymore. We found that with personalized education and the way that is interpreted right now, it's something that is done to them. And we're trying to show that if a learner identifies themselves as a learner who could learn at any time, anywhere, and they own and are responsible for their learning, they are accountable for it, and they own it. The issue I'm having, we work with a lot of teachers who are caught in a system that is still the Carnegie unit. It still has the grade levels. It still has standardized tests.
Yep.
And so the issue would be how can we make this work that both teachers and learners can move toward this. And we're working with schools with multi-age co-teaching classrooms where they're looping the kids. Kids are staying with the same teacher for several years. And so there still might be the same structure, but they've opened the door to make it so it's a little more flexible. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Right, and Barbara, I understand your distinction, and I think we all agree that personalized learning needs to happen. But I see it as kind of redundant. For example, it'd be like saying personalized grocery shopping. It's like we all go grocery shopping, and you know what? It is in fact fundamentally personal. What you shop for, what I shop for, what our tastes are, and all of those things. It just is, and we all know that. When I'm talking about personalized education, the analogy there is, okay, the suppliers, all of us, whether we're teachers, we're vendors, we're people who provide curriculum or whatever, it's how do we do the best job of supporting this learning process that just actually is fundamentally personal. So that's the distinction I'm drawing. I'm not disagreeing with you about personalized learning, but I want to focus on how do we, as the suppliers of education in all the different ways that we do it, how do we do a better job of focusing on each one of those individual people and their learning?
Yeah, and I think one of the key things there is, the grading context. I love following what's going on with competencyworks.org. I've tried as best as I humanly possibly can to keep track of what folks are doing out there relative to competency-based, or some people refer to it as mastery-based or performance-based models. But the key thing is, focusing on what it is that you're able to do as opposed to some quote-unquote arbitrary grade. And the thing about the accountability versus the individual goals, when Race to the Top came out, and I heard that they were going to throw $350 million into research and development on next-gen, assessments, I was really excited because in my mind I was thinking they were going to move down that path. And although they've done some really creative things from a technology enablement of different types of items, it's still the old model. So it's perpetuating the old model as opposed to really focusing on the competencies of the learners. And without that focus, I think in the model, if that model doesn't change, you don't enable true opportunities for personalization.
I'm going to jump in on one thing because we've worked with a lot of states that are using they're moving to competencies. They're part of the consortium with INACOL and Competency Works. The issue is that the teaching is still teacher-centered, and they're trying to figure out how can we make this so if the learner is going to take more ownership of their learning and the teacher is going to be changing this role, they have to kind of look at another way to identify how this works. So if competency fits in a learner-centered environment, then it might work more effectively. And that's one of the things, we've been talking to some of the next generation schools, the school districts there that have gotten Race to the Top. Some of the issues is how do we do this in this traditional system? They got to change the system. And that's what they're trying to figure out how to do it.
Barbara, one of the things I'll say is we are absolutely seeing, even in some very large school districts, where they're able to focus on, personalized learning, personalized education, but this is where we're talking about the school district changing their focus. And one of our favorites is a big district in North Carolina that they're very focused on putting together a plan. It can be a really simple plan. It can be an elaborate plan for each individual student and knowing what their goals are. Sometimes they set their goals. Sometimes the goals are set for them by the teachers. But just knowing each one of those different sets of goals in the different classes allows the teacher to modify what they're doing with that student in a way that's more personal with that student and engages those students more successfully. And they haven't blown up the traditional school system there. In fact, they're doing this on a really big scale. But one of the big differences is just knowing the differences in those students and what those students are trying to achieve.
Yeah, I applaud that, Sean. I think, definitely knowing more about the learner, especially to what Barbara's saying, if you're giving them more agency to take ownership of that, that's wonderful. I think one of the issues from a model standpoint always runs if you still have kind of that district curriculum and instruction pacing guide mentality, then that would run afoul of personalizing learning, because you're going to require the student to move at a pace that may not be ideal to him or her, and may actually start them at a particular starting place that is inappropriate as well, whether it's too easy or too hard.
I want to jump in. I want to jump in. The one thing about becoming prepared for your future is you need to be able to self-regulate your learning. If the district or the teacher is doing that for you, right from the beginning, right from kindergarten or preschool, you are learning how to give over that control. And you don't know how to be that critical thinker you're going to need for the future. We just put up a new post on how to develop an expert learner, and we need to create expert learners for all learners, and teachers. How do you do that? And you can't do that if the district is creating mandates and following. It's like Steve just said. If you're still developing that pacing guide, it's not personal.
I think we all agree that those things. In fact, where we see this, I think the point I wanted to make was, you don't have to blow up the system. They're absolutely in the districts, most of them that we're working on. You do have some pretty specific curriculum, and some of that's changing right now in different states here. And you do have, of course, pacing guides and all those sorts of things. There is a conflict, without a doubt, between that and truly personalized learning for each individual student. But just by understanding the differences for those students, teachers are able to create some flexibility. It may not really just be there in the curriculum and the pacing guide, but they're able to create it successfully today.
Yeah, I agree, Sean. And the
concept of
personalizing education, personalizing education, giving that the flexibility and understanding your learner better. Definitely agree with that, especially if, as you said at the beginning in your intro, you actually have some quality data, hopefully both based on their intellectual as well as social, emotional, and other profile. But ultimately, it's going to continue to run into conflict from a model perspective if the teacher is asked to do that type of flexibility within a 3-week time frame that she's allotted to for that particular unit.
So we're going to continue this conversation. Hang on, Barbara. We're going to continue the conversation. I knew this was going to be like a stampede of horses this time. So hang on for a sec, because I want to make sure we get some of our segments going. We'll come back to the conversation. But I do want to say one of the ways that we compensate our guests, we're just doing an absolutely amazing job, of course, because this is something they're passionate about. One of the ways we compensate our guests, probably the only way, is that we give them the opportunity to donate $50 to a project of their choice. And I just want to give us a chance here to break the conversation, and let's talk a little bit about which projects you chose. We do that in most cases through Donors Choose, and again with the assistance of our sponsor, MCH Strategic Data. Again, very helpful in helping support that program. But and Barbara, you selected one in Oakland, which is Bring Tech to East Oakland: Computers for Aspiring Engineers. Tell us briefly, because I want to get back to the conversation. Tell us why you selected that.
Okay, I live in East Oakland. I love Oakland. I worked in Oakland for 20 years. I actually worked with this school, helping them write their digital high school grant. When I realized that they have very little technology, and as a high school, I wanted to help support them. So they still need to make more to meet their goals. So if anyone wants to go there and help and support them, that would be wonderful.
And you can get to that actually on our page from the Ed Table Talk page, or you can actually go to Donors Choose, and we have a page there that shows items that we've donated to on behalf of our guests. So you can find that there. The second one, Steve, you selected sensory room equipment, and that project has been funded. So congratulations, but still tell us about it.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Michael, through Ed Table Talk and MCH for doing this. When I found out that this was an opportunity for me to give back, I thought immediately about the school system where my son, who was under an IEP as an autistic student, and actually has thrived. So it was a great opportunity for me to give back to the school system and the phenomenal educators in that school system that helped my son in particular. And this one related back to the elementary school that helped support it and equipment they were looking for.
Perfect. Our last, which is Sean's selection, is actually not on Donors Choose. It's actually a project that Sean has been engaged with. I will say that Sean had asked me once to speak at one of their conferences, and I had an opportunity to play duets with his daughter, who is a very talented violinist, and proceeded to tell me when I was sharp or flat, and so precocious, just like her dad. So tell us about this program, Sean.
I think she was about 6 years old at the time, here.
Yeah,
and,
don't rub it in.
She's more polite now that she's grown up, or nearly grown up. But let's see. This is a program that we've supported for a long time where, as I'm sure we're all aware, that music programs in urban schools have been under siege for a long time, along with a lot of the things we were just talking about, prescribed curriculum and focus on some very, specific and narrow topics, and yet music is incredibly important and valuable in so many different ways. And this particular program, what they do is they support strings programs in urban schools, and they do it in two ways. By bringing in professional musicians to play with the students. I've done a lot with them in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And another one is pairing up urban schools like Bridgeport High School with suburban schools and having the strings programs play together where the kids from the two different districts are stand partners together. It's a wonderful social and musical experience.
Perfect. Well, again, thanks for the opportunity to donate to each of the projects of interest to you. And, again, thanks for MCH's support in that process. Let's go ahead and go back to our conversation about personalized. Of course, what we just talked about, of course, each part of those has a personalized nature to it. I do want to bring in some of the data that two of our guests shared with us. Barbara, you shared some data about student engagement dropping over time and showed that, percent engagement, which of course is a really interesting piece of data just to compute, that where 76% of kids are engaged in elementary school, it drops to 61% and then drops to 44% in high school. A pretty linear drop over that time.
Mm-hmm.
You want to tell us about that, and let's discuss it a little bit.
Well, yeah, it was pretty interesting data that it was from the Gallup student poll, and I think they did 500,000 students participated in it. And they were measuring hope, engagement, and well-being in grades 5 through 12. And it's, different metrics. They found that hope, engagement, and well-being account for 1/3 of the variance of student success. But we don't tend to measure those things. We tend to measure test scores. And the thing is that we found that engagement in school, that is like a gold standard. That's what we want. We want kids to be engaged. But, just talking to teachers, we asked them, what does engagement look like? And what does hope look like? And then how do you measure it? So we're trying to get people to really start thinking about that and look at it. I mean, what do you think about that? It's pretty sad when you look that schools are losing out by the time they reach middle school. Kids they're becoming bored and they're dropping out, and even if they're there, they're dropping out.
Well, I'd like to jump in here because we've seen things very similar to what you see in these surveys here, and just by talking with students. When you ask them about school, and they'll tell you, okay, they don't see the relevance of what they're doing. And we see this. We're working with a group of districts in Texas that have started thinking differently about truancy and dropout problem. And of course, like lots of school districts, an approach they've taken in the past is if things really get bad, we'll drag the parents into court and we'll make this a legal issue here. And what they find is that doesn't work because fundamentally it's an engagement issue. It's like what you're seeing right here. When these students are not showing up, they're saying, okay, they don't see why, and this is not important enough for them to actually be there, and they don't see the relevance of it. So this is exactly what we're all trying to change here.
Well, one reason why this really affected me is I live in Oakland, and the dropout rate is really high in these urban schools, and the crime rate is really high. And we need to do something now to stop it because it's only going to get worse if we don't. And we're losing too many kids. So, and they have to have some hope for their future.
Steve, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The hope is key, and I remember some stats. I don't remember the exact thing, but when I was working at a prior company around reading education, and it was focused on, there was a judge out of Detroit talking about the fact that, a lot of these students who have not been successful in school and don't find themselves in the school environment being satisfied turn to crime. And a lot of times it's easier for them to turn to crime than to be made fun of and or feel foolish in front of their peers.
Yeah. I mean, I think bottom line is kids are engaged, right? I mean, they're just not engaged in the things that we necessarily want them to be engaged in. And I think how you bring those two together is really at the essence of personalized learning. Not that I think there's a good way to build an IEP around crime, but
no.
But there are ways to use those talents. We did have a question from one of our listeners who asked, "How is personalized learning different from an IEP?" And they also were interested if we could say something about LMSs, CCSs, and data analytics and tracking of students. I don't know if we have time to touch on all of those. I know we do, in fact, plan to have a show talking about learning management environments and data analytics. So let's focus on the first one on personalized learning and IEP. How are they different? How are they alike?
Jump in for one thing. With an individual education plan, it's usually designed by the teacher or through the data that they get. Where if you have a personalized learning plan, and the learner is defining how they learn best. And like I said before, and like Steve also reiterated about UDL, Universal Design for Learning, there are approaches where the learner can identify their strengths, their challenges, their interests, their aspirations, talents, and more. And with that, they can also put together their own goals and plans, and the teacher is guiding this process and helping them monitor it. So it's not an IEP per se, but it's similar. It's just that the learner is now driving it.
Yeah, I think there's definitely commonalities between the two because, the IEP, when done well, will focus on the strengths of that learner as well as the deficiencies and try to scaffold approaches to help enable that learner. So it definitely is focused on a personalized approach. It is really thinking about that learner. I think the only difference that I would see is the individual education plans are typically more isolated as opposed to more of an overall model within education and throughout every aspect of that learner's opportunities.
And one other thing. Could I just jump in real quick? One other thing is, with response to intervention, they tend to look at where they're failing, and with personalized learning, it's more response to learning. They're looking at where they can catch them before they fail. So that's what I see the difference.
Yeah, I think we're all seeing that there are a lot of similarities, and I think one of the big differences that we see is it lets the student take the reins, because initially some of them may be, failing, or you might be failing in some areas here. So sometimes, and it's funny, I pick on my kids all the time when I talk about this. It's like I have a son who's very much into science, but language arts is not his thing. Okay, he's not setting his own goals in language arts. He still doesn't like it, so he doesn't. He sets his own goals and has since he was a little bitty kid in science and math, but not in language arts. Okay, so you need to have both of those things, but the big difference with personalized learning is that the individual can drive here. They don't have to drive everything completely on their own, because what we see is in a lot of cases students aren't ready to drive everything. Somebody else might need to push them a little bit in a few areas.
So, Steve, you shared with us some case studies that came out of a conference last month. Earlier this month?
Right.
I can't keep track.
Yep,
can you talk a little bit about those case studies? We won't have a lot of time, but
yeah, I'll highlight one in particular. I think some folks have heard of it. If you haven't, it's about the Education Achievement Authority in the Detroit area, and really focused on them thinking of a complete restart and new model towards education. And they did focus on, not just reworking that model, but moving away from seat time, focusing on competency-based learning. There definitely was a deliberate focus on universal design for learning, giving them multiple options for engagement and representation, and then active expression during their learning. The core principles, they focused on methods and tools and practices that promote student ownership, a lot of what Barbara's been highlighting, ownership of their learning, and creating opportunities for the learners to discuss and truly understand their goals and their progress. And the one thing that I thought was particularly interesting in the case study that was shared was around the professional development aspects for the teachers, and really emphasizing that shared mindset and vision at the beginning, and then really involving them and view themselves as creating and designing personalized learning, and especially leveraging the data to help guide that learner growth.
Perfect. All of these resources, by the way, the things that Barbara shared, also Steve, will be posted up at the Ed Table Talk website, so you can take a look at that. Any thoughts, Barbara or Sean, around what you just shared?
I don't know if it's just me, Michael, but you were kind of breaking up.
Yeah, it was hard to hear what you just said. Steve, do I sound okay?
You sound fine, Barbara.
Okay. I read the report and the case study, so I'll just, I agree with the 5 pillars, what they said, and some of the approaches, and you're right, that if the teachers have the ability to have flexible learning environments, it's just I still see teachers working harder than the kids in this. So, even though they're making flexible learning stations, I don't see them turning the learning over to the kids enough in here. So maybe I just need to read it over again.
Yeah, and I apologize. I can't say, I have not been directly involved with that effort, so I'm learning secondhand through a variety of different sources. So I definitely was encouraged by the model that they're focusing on and adjusting the opportunity for pace. But I can't speak to the firsthand knowledge of how much they're providing that student to, really take ownership. They definitely are moving in that direction, and that's what I was really encouraged by.
Yeah.
We have been seeing is when you give the students the opportunity to pick, a topic, a thing for them to focus on, they start thriving more. If you just say, okay, here's what I want you to do, okay, they'll do just enough. And, of course, I'm sure we've all seen this with our own children as well. We say, okay, but here's something, if this is your goal, this is something you want to show. It's funny, a few years ago I got to see a big initiative that, believe it or not, Memphis City Schools, put together, where they had more than 100,000 students present their own projects, to the community, as a audience and a jury there. Students got to pick their own topics. It was amazing what they did. So, you want to see the students do more work than the teachers? Boy, they absolutely did. It was, designing, building a scale model of a house, explaining how the fault under Memphis works and what dangers it is, and even why it's such an infrequent earthquake that might happen there in Memphis, and yet how devastating it could be when it does happen, and all those kinds of things. This was not somebody told them, you got to do this, and they gave them the opportunity, to do something they were passionate about.
Well, see, I love that. And we need more. We need to showcase more and more of that where it's happening around the country, because I think the problem is that people need to see it. They need to feel comfortable because we've only know what we know as students ourselves or what we were taught as teachers. It's very difficult to move out of this if we're the ones still accountable.
So true.
Well, I'm going to take us to our next segment, which is really looking at some of the conferences that are coming up, some directly related to this topic, some less so. Let's go down the list. So those of you who are listening may be interested in attending, and we'll try to give you some tips about the nature of the conference and how you can prepare for that. The first one we're going to talk about is near and dear to my heart, and that is the Computer Using Educators of California group, CUE. It actually started at the high school where I taught, Independence High School, and I remember laying out the lines in the gym for the exhibitors and all the like. So it's a group that I know well. Barbara, you're going to be there, and you're leaving tomorrow, right?
Yep, I'm leaving tomorrow, and actually I was at that high school too. I maybe helped put the lines down with you. That's how long I've been there. I actually write a column for CUE. I write the professional development column, so I'm very, it's my friends, my family, my network, and I can't wait to see everybody. But if anyone's going, they now have all the program online, and they're going to have multiple strands. In fact, there is a diversity strand and UDL. I'm going to be speaking about UDL there, Steve. So hope you're going to be there.
I wish I was.
Yeah, and but there's a lot of wonderful. It's a bigger conference this year. It's already bigger than last year. So we know that there's more people coming. It's going to be fun. Michael, you're going to be there?
I'm not, unfortunately, because I agree. It's like family. Palm Springs. It's too warm. I need all the rain from the Pacific Northwest. So it's. Let's move to the next conference we have here, which is the SIIA EdTech, the Ed Industry Summit. Steve, you're going to talk to us about that.
Sure. This is it's an event that happens in San Francisco, typically beginning mid-May. I think this year it's mid-May, and it's always a great opportunity to really learn a little bit more about what's going on in the industry. It is typically more industry-focused, vendor-focused than it is educator-practitioner-focused, but we certainly do our best to bring in those from the field to help us truly understand the reality of the opportunities. And I'm particularly excited. Michael and I, as he mentioned at the beginning of the hour, are involved with the Tech and Development Committee, and there's always a Tech and Dev strand, and we try to focus on the aspects of the foundational elements of personalized learning, and based on our last conversation, I think there's some key ones, not the least of which understanding metadata related to learning objects and how to tag those effectively to meet the needs, personalized needs of learners.
Okay,
Perfect. And
I'd like to go there.
Go ahead, Barbara.
It's right next. I live here.
We'll look at getting you invited.
Yeah,
that sounds great. And I know that representatives from MCH Strategic Data, our sponsor, will be at not at Q, but they may be at Q, but certainly at the Ed Industry Summit as well. So I do want to throw in the CIC, Content in Context. That's the AAP conference that's the following month in June 2nd through 4th in Washington, D.C. There's a global day. There's then 2 full days of really good introspection about the publishing industry and the nature of creating instructional resources, the nature of the economy, looking at technology, real innovative group. And for full disclosure, again, I'm the co-chair of that conference. So let me know if you plan to come. I'll make sure you have a productive time there. Let's talk quickly about ISTE. It's a little further out, and that's going to be in Atlanta, Georgia. If you're not familiar with ISTE, then you got to get familiar. International Society for Technology and Education. For those of you who have been out of the loop, that's what used to be called NEC, and that's June 28th through July 1st in Atlanta. I'm sure it'll be hot and sweltering, so you'll have lots of time with lots of people in the convention hall and lots of great sessions. So highly recommend that conference. And Barbara, let's turn back to you for the last one we're going to discuss, which is the 5 W's personalized learning.
Well, actually, can I go back to ISTE? Because
sure.
We're going to be at ISTE, and we're bringing several schools, coaches from different school districts to talk about their projects and how they're personalizing learning there. So we're going to be doing a poster and a presentation sessions. So, and also looking at, they also have a thing called Hack Ed. I don't know if anyone knows about that, but it's the day before. And so those are always fun. So I don't know if anyone's, I don't know, Sean and Steve, are you going to be there?
This is, ironically, the first year I'll miss ISTE since 2005, I think.
Oh,
wow.
Geez.
Sean?
Actually, no. I don't know if we're going to have folks there. I know I'm not going to be at that time.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Oh, well.
I miss you guys.
Well, so tell us quickly, Barbara, about 5 W's, because we need to get on to our You Can't Handle the Truth ending here.
Okay, well, the 5 W's of personalized learning is an e-course that we put together. That is the what, the who, the where, the wow, and the why of personalized learning. And we are on our 15th, I think 13th or 15th section of it, and we just filled up, so we don't have openings right now, but we're going to be offering it again. It's on our website.
Well, so
our website,
we'll let people know.
Let them know.
You're offering.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. So let's go back to our You Can't Handle the Truth. We had 3 different readings here. Tell us what you guys think. Which one do you think is the truth?
This is Steve. I just hope it's not mine.
Mine too.
I think I found it, just from my casual observation, there was a little more reality possibility in both Sean's and Barbara's, but I think, from a shock value standpoint, I'm scared that the one I read will be the one that's true.
Sean?
Yeah, I'm thinking that the how am I doing that I butchered when I read it, but it seems if this isn't a true story, this story definitely exists out there. I think that students. It's an interesting thing when you think about evaluating. How students are doing here. How can they really evaluate themselves? Because clearly some of them are much harder on themselves. When you say evaluate yourself A through F, it's like I came to school, therefore I get an A. Maybe I feel that way. Barbara might say, if I didn't get everything exactly right, then she feels like she failed. It's like, come on. So that part wouldn't work, I don't think. But how do you solve this problem? How do you really put that in in students' hands? It's an interesting struggle.
I'm just hoping, don't take this personally, was not true, because they wanted to personalize learning as the best strategy to retain students. That scared me.
Yeah.
So which one is true?
So which ones do you? Where does it look like we landed? There's How Am I Doing, which is You're going for Sean's?
Yeah.
Yeah, me
Sean?
too.
I'm thinking that one's true.
Well,
Mhm.
well, you'll be happy to know that both our listener audience and the three of you are the first groups to get it correct. So obviously, I'm not doing my job quite as well, but you got it right. That's actually the truth. How am I doing? That's actually from a blog by a teacher administrator in Surrey, British Columbia, and we'll have that posted up at the Ed Table Talk as well. So she really did it more for introspective reasons, thinking about the sense of her teaching, and I really found it was very, very interesting. So thank you all for participating in that. That's always a lot of fun. So let's see, where are we? We're getting down to the end of our show here. Do you have any sort of final thoughts around personalized? You've got like 30 seconds to tell me, and then we'll do the what would you tell at the end. Any last bits you want to share?
Well, I guess I just think that it's going to take time, and you need a common language around what is personalized learning. This is from our own experience, is that if you want everyone to be on board and to actually move the process, and so teachers are feeling like they're not the only ones doing this, one teacher doing this in the school, there has to be a shared meaning and a common language, and that takes time. And even with the three of us, we're pretty close, but we might be a little different here.
Well, I think it is going to take time. I think one of the things that we've seen is there's a lot of mechanics to this. Like, how are you really going to do this? We've talked about, you can see all of the, all of the things that we could struggle with, whether it's pacing guides or you name it here. What we've seen, though, is once you actually have that connection between the teacher and the student's own goals and what's relevant to those students, a lot of the rest of those mechanics actually can be dealt with. But without that, I think we would I think we'll struggle for a long time. But if we start with that,
right,
with focusing on the students here and their goals, that we can get through those other things, the mechanical things.
And Steve?
Yeah, I think you redefine the model first. Make sure you got a strong focus on PD, especially around universal design for learning and the context of embedded formative assessment, and make sure there's room to build that metacognitive feedback for the learner, the stuff about student agency that has been advocating so strongly for and rightly. And technology will get pulled in as an enabler and an equalizer within personalized learning in those spots where it can be most effective, and it truly can. You can do so many things to scale that you couldn't do without it, and so many more creative opportunities that you couldn't do without it. But until you start with that model first, it's not going to be pulled in the right ways.
Well, thank you. Thanks, all three of you. I know we'll hear just a little bit from you towards the end. This was our show on putting the person in personalized education. We know there's a lot more to talk about on this topic. Just make sure you join us. April 22nd is our next show. The topic is Science Education, the Next Generation. It's at the usual time, 11 a.m. Pacific or 2 p.m. Eastern. By then, hopefully, we'll also have it so that you can download Ed Table Talk from iTunes. You can also get it from Blog Talk Radio. I do thank, again, our sponsor, MCH Strategic Data, a wonderful group to work with, and highly recommend working with them. I'll be at the London Book Fair in early April, so I'll be happy to share that at the next show. But let me just ask our guests to give one piece of advice. You have 15 seconds each. What piece of advice would you give a district or a teacher who is making a move towards personalized learning? Sean.
Steve, I'd say get to learn the universal design for learning guidelines, understand them, and start working to adapt them in your classroom.
Sean.
Okay, and this is Sean. Know what your students want to achieve, what their goals, what they love.
And Barbara.
I'm going to say ditto, because they both have everything I want to say. But think of your students as learners first and focus on them and their goals.
perfect. Thank you, everybody. This is Ed Table Talk out. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.